An undercover visit to his own restaurant takes an unexpected turn when the owner overhears a conversation that changes everything. Subscribe for more stories and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Warm the glow of pendant lights reflected off polished wood tables, creating an inviting atmosphere at Unity Cafe, a place often celebrated as a haven for comfort and community. Hayes, the cafe's owner, sat in his small office above the bustling dining area, staring down through the glass window at the scene below. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. This cafe was alive with energy. Diners leaned over their plates, sharing laughter and stories while servers weaved expertly between tables, their trays balanced with steam and dishes. Yet something felt off. Will couldn't pinpoint when the unease had started. Perhaps it had been gradual, creeping in like an imperceptible crack in a pristine surface. He should have been proud. Unity Cafe had become a local landmark, lauded for its creative menu and warm ambiance. And yet as he watched, he felt a hollow ache in his chest. The scene below seemed rehearsed and artificial. Smiles looked practiced, and laughter sounded muted as if muffled by an invisible barrier for a moment. Will's gaze lingered on one of the servers. Her forced smile faltered as she picked up a cup of spilled coffee, the customer offering no apology. She stiffened, muttered something under her breath, and hurried away. Will frowned. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed tension among his staff. Some employees had left suddenly over the past year, citing vague reasons that he hadn't probed too deeply at the time. Now he wondered if he should have. Unity Cafe hadn't always felt this way. Will thought back to its early days. He could still remember the excitement of the grand opening. 5 years ago, the thrill of seeing his dream come to life, he had wanted to create a place that celebrated diversity. A cafe where people of all backgrounds could come together. The name itself, Unity, symbolized his vision back then. He had been hands-on, chatting with every customer and overseeing every detail. The community had embraced his vision and the cafe thrived. But as the business grew, Will had stepped back from day-to-day operations. His trusted managers ran the show now, and he only made occasional appearances. Perhaps that was the problem. Somewhere along the way, the cafe had become just another business, losing the soul he had worked so hard to infuse into it. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Lisa, the cafe's senior manager, holding a stack of reports. She entered with her usual brisk efficiency. "Everything looks good this month," she said, placing the papers on his desk. "Revenue's up 5% and we've had glowing reviews online." "Great," Yu replied, forcing a smile. He glanced at the papers but didn't reach for them. "How's the team doing?" Lisa said. Her tone was clipped. "No major issues." Il nodded, though her response felt too practiced, too polished. He didn't press further. After Lisa left, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the reports without reading a word. Numbers didn't tell the whole story. The cafe might be thriving on paper, but something was missing. The nagging feeling followed him home that evening, settling in his chest like a weight he couldn't shake, the sense that he was out of touch with the heart of his business. Unity Cafe had once been his pride and joy, a place where he connected with people and made them feel seen. Now it felt like he was running a machine. Efficient but soulless. The next morning, as he sipped his coffee in his quiet kitchen, an idea came to him. If he wanted to understand what was happening at Unity, he needed to see it through fresh eyes, not as the owner, but as an ordinary customer. The thought filled him with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Could he step back into the world he had created and find the answers he was looking for? That evening, he returned to the cafe under the cover of anonymity. He traded his tailored suit for a plain hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. As he approached the cafe, rain pattered against the pavement and the air smelled of damp concrete. He hesitated for a moment outside the door, his reflection wavering in the glass inside. The familiar hum of conversation greeted him. The cafe was nearly full, the clinking of cutlery and the murmur of voices blending into a comforting symphony. He slid into a booth near the back, away from the main activity. He kept his head down, letting the cap's brim shield his face as he studied the room. At first glance, everything seemed fine. Servers moved briskly between tables, their trays laden with plates of colorful dishes. Customers leaned in close, talking and laughing. The cafe had the same warm, inviting atmosphere that had always been its hallmark, but as you observed more closely, cracks began to emerge. Most of the diners were white, with only a few tables occupied by people of color. A pair of black women sat near the window, their conversation quiet across the room. A black server approached a table with a forced smile, only to have a customer speak to her curtly. She nodded, her shoulders stiff, and walked away. The patterns were subtle, but Will couldn't ignore them. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes scanning the room. That's when he noticed two boys sitting in a booth near the corner. They were black, around 12 or 14 years old, and they looked out of place. Their clothes were slightly worn, and they kept glancing around nervously, as if expecting to be told they didn't belong. Their low voices carried just enough for O to catch snippets of their conversation. "Are you sure this is the place?" one of them asked, his voice edged with anxiety. "Mom said he's here all the time." The other replied more firmly, "We just need to wait." Heart quickened. He didn't know who they were talking about, but something in their tone unsettled him. He turned his attention back to the menu, trying to appear inconspicuous, but his focus remained on the boys. "What if he doesn't care?" the younger boy whispered. "What if he just laughs at us?" "He'll care," the older one insisted. "He has to. Mom said he's the reason we're stuck like this." The words hit Will like a jolt. Who were they talking about, and what did it have to do with unity? At the cafe, he gripped the edge of the table, his mind racing. He wanted to dismiss it as kids being dramatic, but their hushed tones carried a weight that he couldn't ignore. The waitress approached his table, breaking his train of thought. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked with a practiced smile. "Water's fine," Will said, his voice steady. "And give me a few minutes with the menu." She nodded and left, but he barely glanced at the menu. His mind was fixated on the boys. He needed to know who they were and why they were here. Something told him their presence wasn't random, and he wasn't ready for what he might find. The sound of the rain tapping against the cafe windows mingled with the hum of conversation, creating a cozy. Cocooned in noise, he sat in the booth near the back, his water untouched, eyes scanning the room while pretending to study the menu, but his focus kept drifting back to the two boys in the corner. Their presence nagged at him, a thread dangling loose in an otherwise tidy tapestry. The older boy, dressed in a faded hoodie, sat with his back straight, his dark eyes darting around the room. His younger companion, whose baseball cap was pulled low over his forehead, looked more hesitant. He fidgeted with the edge of the table, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. From where Will sat, their voices were low, but the tension in their tones carried across the room. "Do you think he even knows what he did to her?" the younger boy asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. "He knows," the older one replied sharply. "How could he not? Mom said it was his decision," she said. "He's the reason she lost everything." Will's heart skipped a beat. Their words felt pointed, accusatory, even though he was certain they didn't know who he was. He shifted slightly in his seat, trying to appear casual, but the air around him seemed heavier now. What could they mean? He tried to recall if there had been any incidents involving staff or customers that might explain their conversation, but nothing came to mind. Yet the way they spoke with such bitterness made it clear this wasn't idle chatter. The waitress returned, setting a glass of water on the table. "Have you decided yet?" she asked, her smile. Polite but distracted, she glanced briefly at the boys, her brow furrowing, before she turned her attention back to you. "Just the house special," he said, not bothering to look at the menu. His appetite had vanished, replaced by a gnawing curiosity as the waitress walked away. Will's gaze returned to the boys. The older one leaned in closer to his companion, spoke in a tone low enough that you had to strain to catch the words. She said he didn't even try to help the boy. He muttered, "She gave everything to this place, and he just let it happen." The younger boy hesitated, his fingers still picking at the edge of the table. What if we're wrong? What if it wasn't his fault? "It was him," the older one insisted. "Mom showed me his picture. I know what he looks like." Will's pulse quickened. Picture him. His mind raced as he tried to piece together their words. He had no idea who their mother might be, but their story was starting to sound uncomfortably familiar. Someone who had worked here, someone who felt wronged, someone who blamed him. He looked down at the menu in front of him, his hands gripping the edges tightly. A faint memory stirred in the back of his mind. A name he hadn't thought about in years. Monica something? But before he could fully grasp the thought, the older boy's voice cut through his haze. She said, "He didn't care." The boy whispered his words, laced with anger. She said, "He let them treat her like she was nothing." The weight of their conversation pressed down on you. He had always prided himself on creating a welcoming, inclusive environment at Unity Cafe. But as he listened, doubts crept in. Had he missed something? Had someone on his team failed to uphold the values he held so dear? Or worse, had he been complicit without even realizing it? The younger boy looked around nervously. "What if we get caught?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "We won't," the older one replied firmly. "We're just here to see him. We don't have to do anything yet." He clenched his jaw. The more he heard, the more it felt like they were talking about him. But why? He couldn't sit here any longer, letting his imagination fill in the gaps. He needed answers. The waitress returned with his plate, setting it down with a quick, "Enjoy your meal." He gave a distracted nod, not even glancing at the food. Instead, he leaned slightly to the side, trying to catch more of the boy's conversation without drawing attention to himself. "Mom said he's the reason we're stuck in that crappy apartment," the older boy said, his voice trembling with barely contained frustration. "She said he took everything from her." The younger boy glanced at his brother, worry etched across his face. "Do you think he even remembers her? Do you think he'd care if we told him?" Yu's stomach churned. The pieces were falling into place, and he didn't like the picture they were forming. Whoever their mother was, she clearly believed he had wronged her. But how he tried to recall every major decision he'd made as the owner of Unity Cafe, every hiring and firing, every conflict, nothing seemed to fit the intensity of their accusations. He looked over at the bored boys again. They were young, barely teenagers, but their eyes carried the weight of something far beyond their years. It wasn't just anger he saw in them. It was hurt, the kind that left scars as the rain outside turned into a steady downpour. Will made a decision. He couldn't sit here pretending to be a passive observer any longer. He had to know the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. But how should he approach them? Confronting them directly felt risky. If they were already angry, revealing his identity might only make things worse. But if he stayed quiet, he might never learn the full story. He glanced at the booth behind him one last time. The older boy's expression was set, determined. The younger one looked less sure, but he followed his brother's lead. They were waiting for something, or someone. Before he could decide on his next move, the older boy leaned closer to his brother and, whispered, "Mom, said he wouldn't hide. If he's here, we'll know the words." Struck a nerve. Wouldn't hide, it felt like a challenge, a direct accusation. Will suddenly felt exposed, as if they could see right through his disguise. He had come here to reconnect with the heart of his cafe, but now it felt like he was standing on the edge of something far more personal and far more painful. Who was their mother? What had she told them about him? Most importantly, was any of it true? As the boys continued their hushed conversation, he made his decision. He would confront them, but carefully. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to get them by staying in the shadows. The rain outside intensified its rhythmic patter against the cafe, windows matching the erratic beating of Will's heart. He sat, frozen in his booth, his half-eaten meal untouched. His mind churned with the boys' words, their hushed voices reverberating in his ears like accusations directed squarely at him. Whoever their mother was, she believed he had ruined her life. And now her sons were here, waiting to confront the man they held responsible. Will exhaled deeply, his breath trembling. This was not what he had expected when he decided to go undercover. His intention had been to reconnect with the essence of his cafe, to uncover why it felt like the soul of Unity was slipping away. Instead, he had stumbled upon a story far more personal and painful, a story he was seemingly at the center of. The boys were still deep in conversation, their heads bent close together. The older one, with his serious eyes and defiant posture, seemed to lead their whispered exchange. The younger one fidgeted nervously, glancing around the cafe as though expecting someone to notice them. They were clearly anxious, but determined. Will knew he couldn't sit there any longer. Whatever accusations they had, whatever truth they believed, he needed to hear it from them. Yet the thought of confronting them filled him with unease. He didn't want to scare them, or, worse, confirm their worst suspicions about him. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate, as though rising too quickly might shatter. The fragile tension in the room sliding, his hands into the pockets of his hoodie. He walked toward the boys' booth. The sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor felt deafening to him, though no one else in the cafe seemed to notice. As he approached, the boys looked up, their wide eyes betraying a mix of fear and defiance. "Hey," Will said softly, stopping a few feet from their table. He kept his tone light and his posture non-threatening. "I couldn't help but notice you two seem a little uneasy. Is everything all right?" The older boy straightened in his seat, his expression hardening. "We're fine," he said curtly, his voice edged with suspicion. Yu nodded, pretending not to notice the defensiveness in his tone. That's good, he said. I just thought, well, I overheard a bit of your conversation. You mentioned someone earlier, someone you're looking for. I wondered if maybe I could help. The younger boy's eyes darted to his brother, silently asking for guidance. The older one squared his shoulders, his gaze fixed on O with a mix of caution and determination. Why do you care? He asked, his tone sharp. He hesitated, carefully choosing his words. I don't mean to pry, he said gently, but if you're looking for someone, maybe I know them? I've been around this place for a while. The older boy's eyes narrowed as he studied Will's face for a moment. The cafe seemed to fall away, the sounds of clinking dishes and murmured conversations. Fading into the background then, as if something clicked, the boy's expression shifted. His eyes widened slightly and his jaw tightened. Wait a second, he said slowly, his voice laced with suspicion. You look familiar. Will's heart sank. He forced a small, nervous laugh. A lot of people say that, he said, his voice wavering slightly. I guess I have one of those faces. No, the boy insisted, his voice rising. It's you, you're, him, and you. Hayes, the younger boy gasped, his face paling as he turned to his brother. Are you serious? Is it really him? Will felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. There was no use denying it now. He nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he admitted. I'm Will Hayes, but how do you know who I am? The older boy's eyes blazed with anger. Because of what you did to our mom, he said, his words cutting through the air like a blade. Who? Will blinked, taken aback. Your mom? He repeated, his voice trembling. I'm sorry, but I don't even know who. Yes, you do, the boy snapped, cutting him off. Her name's Monica Reeves. Remember her? The name hit him like thunderclap images flashed through his mind. Monica was a talented young chef who had once worked in his kitchen. He remembered her passion, her creativity, and the spark she brought to her dishes. But he also remembered her sudden departure. One day she had simply quit, leaving without explanation. He hadn't thought about her in years. Monica, he said slowly, the name feeling heavy on his tongue. She worked here, didn't she? She didn't just work here, the boy shot back. She gave everything to this place. She helped you build it, and what did you do? You stole from her. You took her recipes and claimed them as your own. You made sure she couldn't get hired anywhere else. You ruined her life. Will stared at the boy, his mind reeling. That's not true, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never. Why would she think that? Because it's the truth, the boy shouted, his voice trembling with emotion. You ruined her life. You ruined our lives. The younger boy, quieter, more hesitant, finally spoke up. She said, You were jealous of her, he said softly, that you couldn't handle someone else getting the spotlight. Will felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. He searched his memory, trying to piece together what had happened all those years ago. Had he made mistakes? Had he been so focused on building his dream that he hadn't noticed someone else's falling apart? I need to talk to your mom, he said, finally, his voice firm, but calm, if what she told you is true. I need to hear it from her. Please, will you let me talk to her? The boys exchanged a wary glance. Finally, the older one said, She's not here right now, but if you really want to know the truth, you'll have to come see us. Yu nodded, his heart heavy. Then I will, he said as he walked away from their booth. The rain outside seemed to intensify its steady rhythm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. He had come to Unity Cafe seeking answers about his business, but now he was faced with questions about himself, questions he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle by the time Yu arrived at the address the boys had given him. The apartment complex stood like a tired sentinel against the night sky, its peeling paint and cracked sidewalks a stark reminder of a life far removed from his own. The air was damp, carrying the faint smell of mildew and wet. Earth and the dim porch light flickered weakly as he approached the door, who hesitated for a moment. Staring at the worn wooden door in front of him, his reflection in the rain-speckled glass of a nearby window looked unfamiliar. His normally composed demeanor was replaced by a nervous energy that knotted his stomach. This wasn't just about reconnecting with an employee from the past, it was about confronting a version of himself he hadn't considered. What if the boys were right? What if his ambition had blinded him to the harm he had caused? With a deep breath, he knocked on the door. It creaked open after a moment, revealing Jacob, the older boy, standing there with an expression of weary defiance. Behind him, the younger brother, Ethan, peeked out cautiously. "You came," Jacob said, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and distrust. "I told you I would." "Will," replied, his tone steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside him. "I need to understand what happened." Jacob stepped aside reluctantly, motioning for him to enter. The apartment was small but tidy, every surface meticulously cleaned. Despite the worn furniture and faded wallpaper, it smelled faintly of lavender, a comforting touch that clashed with the tension in the air. Family photos lined the walls, many of them showing a younger Monica with the boys at various stages of their childhood. Her smile in those pictures was radiant, full of life and ambition. "She's in the living room," Jacob said, leading the way. Monica arrived, sitting on a worn couch, her face partially illuminated by the flickering light of the television. Her once vivid auburn hair was streaked with gray, and there was a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there the last time Will had seen her, yet she was still unmistakably Monica, the ambitious, determined chef who had once been a rising star in his kitchen, said softly, stepping into the room. Her gaze snapped to him, and her expression flickered between shock and resentment. "Oil haze," she said, her tone cold. "I can't say I expected to see you here." "I didn't know," he began, his voice earnest. "The boys told me what you said about what happened. I need to know, did I really hurt you that badly?" Monica leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest. "You don't remember, do you?" she asked bitterly. "Of course you don't. People like you never do." Her words hit him like a slap. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Monica, I'm not here to argue," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I honestly don't remember doing anything that could have destroyed your life. Please tell me what happened." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she set the remote control aside and straightened. "You want the short version? Fine. You took credit for my work. All those dishes that made your cafe famous. Most of them were mine. I trusted you. Oh, I thought you were mentoring me, helping me grow, but you were just using me." "That's not how I remember it," he said, shaking his head. "You were part of the team, an important part, but I never claimed your work as my own," Monica shot back, her voice rising. "Then why did every article about Unity Cafe mention your name, and only your name? Why did you ignore my contributions? And when I finally confronted you, what did you do? You blacklisted me. No one would hire me after I left." His stomach churned. "Blacklisted," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Monica, I would never." "Yes, you did," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "I tried to get jobs at every major restaurant in the city, and every time I was turned away. It was like someone had put a mark on my name. I had to leave the industry entirely, and now I'm here, barely getting by working a job that doesn't even come close to what I was capable of. All because of you." Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. O searched his memory, trying to reconcile her accusations with his own. Recollections, he remembered Monica as a brilliant chef, someone he had admired and valued, but could his ambition, his relentless drive to succeed, have blinded him to the impact of his actions? Had he been so focused on building Unity Cafe that he had failed to see someone else's dream falling apart? "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "Monica, I swear to you, if I had known how my actions were affecting you, I would have done something." She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. "It's too late for that. The damage is done." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on both of them in the doorway. Jacob and Ethan watched with wide eyes. Their expressions, a mix of anger and confusion, Will turned to them briefly, then back to Monica. "It's not too late," he said firmly, his resolve hardening. "I can't undo the past, but I can try to make things right now. Monica, you're an incredible chef. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a position at Unity Cafe, a senior position with the credit and recognition you deserve." Monica's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked vulnerable, caught off guard by the offer, but then her expression hardened again. "You think you can just buy my forgiveness with a job?" she asked, her voice shaking. "No," Will said, shaking his head. "This isn't about buying forgiveness. It's about giving you the opportunity you should have had from the start. I can't erase what I did, Monica, but I want to help you get back to doing what you love. You don't have to forgive me, but please at least think about it." She stared at him, her emotions worrying on her face. Finally, she exhaled deeply, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know you," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can trust you." "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "Take your time. But whatever you decide, I want you to know I'm sorry, truly." For the first time, her expression softened, if only slightly. "I'll think about it," she said. Will nodded, feeling a small flicker of hope as he turned to leave. Jacob's voice stopped him. "Hey," the boy said, his tone less hostile than before. "Do you really mean it about helping her?" Will turned back, meeting Jacob's gaze. "I do," he said sincerely. "Your mom deserves that much." And more. Jacob studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Okay, we'll see." As Will stepped out into the rain, he felt a strange mix of emotions: guilt, relief, and a renewed sense of purpose. The road to redemption wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to walk it. The rain had subsided to a fine mist by the time he reached the familiar streets near Unity Cafe. Though the weather had calmed, his thoughts remained turbulent. Monica's words replayed in his mind, sharp and raw, each one cutting deeper than the last. He had spent years building Unity Cafe into a place of community and inclusion, or so he thought. Now he was beginning to realize just how much he had missed, how blind he had been to the struggles of people like Monica. Her accusations weren't just about recipes or credit. They were about being silenced, overlooked, and ultimately erased. If he wanted to make amends, it would take more than an apology or a job offer. It would require a fundamental shift, not just in how he saw Unity Cafe, but in how it operated at every level. The following morning, he arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. The quiet hum of the pre-opening routine greeted him, the clatter of dishes being stacked, the low murmur of staff conversations, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Normally, this scene would calm him, but today it only reminded him of the tension simmering beneath the surface. Lisa, the senior manager, was already at her post behind the counter reviewing the day's schedule. She glanced up as Will approached her, expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You're here early," she remarked, closing the schedule book. "Something on your mind?" "Yes," Will replied, his tone serious. "I need to talk to the team. Can you gather everyone in the dining area?" Lisa hesitated, her brows knitting together. "Is everything okay? Did something happen?" "Just get everyone together," he said firmly, though his voice softened as he added, "Please." A few minutes later, the staff assembled in the main dining area, their faces reflecting varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension. Yu stood at the front of the room, his hands clasped in front of him, his gaze sweeping over the group. He recognized every face, yet for the first time, he wondered how well he truly knew these people. "I need to talk to all of you about something important," he began, his voice steady but tinged with unease. Unity Cafe was built on the idea of community, of bringing people together. But recently I've realized that I've failed to live up to that vision. But there are things happening here, things I didn't see but should have. The room fell silent, and the staff exchanged uncertain glances. Lisa folded her arms, her lips pressing into a thin line as she watched him intently. "I met with someone yesterday," H continued, "a former employee named Monica Reeves. Some of you might remember her. She worked here a few years ago as a chef." A few heads nodded while others remained blank. One of the newer servers, a young woman named Kayla, raised her hand hesitantly. "I think I've heard of her," she said. "Wasn't she the one who left suddenly?" "She didn't just leave," we said, his voice firm. "She left because I failed her." Monica faced discrimination here from both staff and customers, and instead of addressing it, instead of supporting her, I let her down. She felt like she had no choice but to leave. A murmur rippled through the group. Some looked genuinely surprised, while others avoided his gaze, their expressions were guarded. Lisa cleared her throat, stepping forward slightly. "With all due respect, Dee, that was years ago. Why bring it up now?" "Because it's not just about the past," he said. "It's about who we are now and who we want to be moving forward. I've spent too long turning a blind eye to problems that don't directly affect me. That ends today." The staff exchanged uneasy glances. A dishwasher named Marco, who had been with the cafe since its early days, raised an eyebrow. "What are you saying, boss? You think we're all just a bunch of racists?" "No," you replied quickly. "That's not what I'm saying. But I do think we need to take a hard look at our culture here. We need to make sure this place is truly inclusive for everyone. That means addressing biases, whether they're intentional or not." Lisa crossed her arms, her tone skeptical. And how exactly do you plan to do that? I'm bringing Monica back, you said, letting the words hang in the air. The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Some staff members looked shocked. Others were indignant. A server named Brandon, who had worked under Monica briefly, scoffed audibly. Your kid, right? She was always stirring up drama. She was advocating for herself. Will corrected sharply. And for others. Something I should have supported her in, but didn't. Kayla raised her hand again. Her expression is uncertain. What's her role going to be? Is she taking someone's job? She'll be coming back as a senior. The chef explained. She'll have full creative control over the menu, and she'll be acknowledged for the contributions she made in the past. The room fell into a tense silence. Finally, Lisa spoke, her voice measured. You're taking a big risk. Not everyone's going to be happy about this. I know, he said, but it's the right thing to do. Over the next week, the tension in the cafe was palpable. While some staff members supported Monica's return, others voiced their concerns, and hushed conversations were overheard. Snippets of resistance. Why is he bringing her back now? She's just going to cause more problems. I don't think I can work with her again. Determined to address the underlying issues, he organized mandatory workshops on diversity and inclusion for the entire staff. He brought in an external facilitator, a woman named Yvonne, who specialized in helping organizations navigate cultural change. On the day of the first workshop, the atmosphere in the cafe was thick with unease. The staff gathered in the dining area, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism. Ione stood at the front of the room, her presence calm yet commanding. Let's start with a simple question, she said, her voice warm but firm. What does inclusion mean to you? The responses were hesitant at first. Some spoke about treating everyone equally, while others mentioned the importance of respecting differences. As the discussion deepened, underlying biases began to surface. A server named Ryan admitted that he sometimes felt awkward interacting with customers from different backgrounds, unsure of what to say or how to act. Avon nodded, encouraging him to elaborate. Awkwardness is normal, she said, but the key is to push through it. Inclusion isn't about being perfect, it's about being willing to learn and grow. By the end of the session, the staff had begun to open up, sharing their experiences and acknowledging areas where they could improve. For some, it was a transformative moment. For others, it was only the beginning of a long and uncomfortable journey. The day of Monica's return arrived with little fanfare, but the weight of its significance was undeniable. She walked into Unity Cafe with her head held high, her presence commanding yet restrained. The staff watched her wearily, unsure of how to react. Some offered polite smiles, others avoided her gaze entirely. You met her at the door. His expression was earnest. Thank you for coming, he said. I almost didn't, she replied, her tone guarded. But Jacob and Ethan convinced me to give you a chance. You raise smart kids. Weil said with a small smile, and I'm grateful you're here. Monica nodded, her gaze sweeping over the cafe. This place hasn't changed much, she said, her voice tinged with both nostalgia and bitterness. But I hope the people have. They're working on it, I said. We all are. He led her to the kitchen, where the staff had gathered to meet her. The room was quiet, the air thick with tension. Monica faced them with a calm yet steely resolve. I know some of you don't want me here, she said, her voice steady, and I understand why, but I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here to do what I love and to make this place better for everyone. Her words hung in the air, met with a mixture of silence and cautious nods. It wasn't the warm welcome she deserved, but it was a start. As the days turned into weeks, Monica began to carve out her place in the cafe once more. She collaborated with the kitchen staff on new dishes, blending her bold ideas with the cafe's established style. Slowly but surely, the tension began to ease, replaced by a sense of mutual respect for Will. The journey was far from over, but as he watched Monica thrive in her element, he felt the first glimmers of hope. Redemption wasn't a destination, it was a process, and for the first time, he believed he was on the right path. The kitchen hummed with activity, its rhythm punctuated by the sharp clatter of knives against cutting boards and the hiss of steam from the stovetop. Unity Cafe was bustling as usual, but beneath the surface of its daily operations, a subtle tension lingered. The staff adjusted to Monica's presence with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some were eager to work with her, recognizing her talent and leadership, while others kept their distance, their smiles tight and their words measured. Monica navigated the environment with a quiet strength, focusing on her work rather than the way glances or occasional whispers. She had been here before, faced resistance before, and she wasn't about to let it deter her now. But it wasn't easy. Every step felt like walking a tightrope, balancing her determination to succeed with the knowledge that not everyone welcomed her return. Watching this unfold was both humbling and heart-wrenching. He had always imagined himself as a leader who fostered unity and inclusion, yet the reality was far more complex. The cafe he had built to bring people together had at times been a place of division. Now he was determined to change that, but it was clear the path would be anything but smooth. The first challenge came a week after Monica's return during the unveiling of the new menu. Monica had spent days refining the dishes, blending her culinary expertise with the cafe's established identity. The result was a menu that celebrated diversity, featuring flavors inspired by her Afro-Caribbean heritage alongside the cafe's traditional offerings. "This menu represents who we are, or at least who we're trying to be," Monica said during the staff meeting. Her voice was calm but firm, her gaze steady. As she addressed the group, "It's about honoring different cultures and bringing people together through food." Most of the staff nodded in agreement, but a few looked skeptical. Brandon, the server who had been vocal about his doubts, crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. "And what if the customers don't like it?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. "What if they say it's too different?" Monica met his gaze without flinching. "Then we'll educate them," she replied. "Good food isn't just about taste. It's about stories. If they're willing to try, I believe they'll see that." Her confidence was unshaken, but we could sense the undercurrent of resistance. He stepped in, his tone firm yet supportive. "This cafe was founded on the idea of unity, of celebrating what makes us different. This menu is an extension of that. I trust Monica's vision, and I hope you all will too." Brandon muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. The room settled into another uneasy silence before the meeting concluded. The launch of the new menu was met with mixed reactions. Some customers embraced the change, their curiosity piqued by the bold flavors and unique presentations. Others were less enthusiastic, sticking to the more familiar dishes or voicing their discomfort with the unfamiliar offerings. One afternoon, a middle-aged couple sat at a corner table, their expressions skeptical as they studied the menu. When their server Kayla approached, the woman frowned and gestured to one of the new dishes. "What is this?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's called jerk chicken, Roy," Kayla explained, her smile politely but strained. "It's a Caribbean dish, very flavorful. The spices are," the woman waved her hand, "as easily, never mind, just bring me the chicken." "Caesar salad." Kayla nodded and retreated to the kitchen. Her frustration was evident when she recounted the exchange to Monica. The chef's expression remained calm, though a flicker of disappointment crossed her face. "It's okay," Monica said quietly. "Change takes time." But not all interactions were so discouraging. A young couple eagerly ordered the Roy and a plate of plantain fritters, their excitement palpable as they tried the dishes. "This is amazing," the woman said, her eyes lighting up as she took a bite. "Why haven't I had this before?" Moments like these reminded Monica and the rest of the team why the new menu was worth the effort. Slowly the tide began to turn. Customers who were initially hesitant started venturing outside their comfort zones, and the cafe began attracting a more diverse clientele within the staff. Progress was slower, but steady. The inclusion workshops had sparked difficult but necessary conversations during one session. Yvonne encouraged the team to share their experiences with bias and discrimination, both as individuals and as a group. Kayla spoke about feeling dismissed by customers who assumed she wasn't knowledgeable about the menu. Marco admitted that he sometimes hesitated to speak up because he didn't want to rock the boat. Even Brandon, who had been one of Monica's biggest skeptics, opened up about his discomfort with change and his fear of being judged for saying the wrong thing. These conversations aren't about blame. Avon reminded them they're about understanding and growth. The goal isn't to be perfect, it's to be better. For Monica, these sessions were a bittersweet reminder of her own struggles. She shared her story with the group, her voice steady but tinged with emotion as she recounted the racism and isolation she had faced during her previous time at the cafe. "I don't expect everything to change overnight," she said, "but I do expect us to try. Not just for me, but for everyone who walks through those doors." Her words resonated with many of the staff, who began to see her not as a threat but as a leader with a vision they could believe in. The turning point came one evening during a particularly busy dinner service. The kitchen was running behind, tensions were high, and orders were piling up, when a miscommunication between the line cooks led to a ruined dish. Monica stepped in without hesitation. "Let's fix it," she said, her tone calm but commanding. She worked alongside the team, guiding them through the process and showing them how to recover quickly. By the end of the night, the kitchen staff was exhausted but impressed. "She knows her stuff," Marco admitted later. His respect for Monica was evident. "I've never seen anyone handle a rush like that." Even Brandon, who had been the most resistant to her return, begrudgingly acknowledged her skills. "I still don't get why she came back," he said to Kayla, "but she's good, really good." For you, watching Monica regain her footing was both inspiring and humbling. He had brought her back to make amends, but she was proving that her value extended far beyond his attempts at redemption. She wasn't just fixing his mistakes, she was elevating the cafe to a level he hadn't imagined. One evening, as the cafe began to wind down, Will found Monica was standing by the stove, a faint smile playing on her lips. She was plating a dish, the careful precision of her movements reflecting both skill and passion. "What's so funny?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," she replied, her smile growing. "If you told me a month ago that I'd be back here working with you, I wouldn't have believed it, honestly." "Neither would I," he admitted with a chuckle. "But I'm glad you're here. The place feels complete now." Monica nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it's a start." As the weeks turned into months, the cafe began to reflect the unity it had always strived for. Monica's leadership and vision transformed not only the menu but also the culture. Staff who had once been wary of her now sought her advice and guidance. Customers who had been hesitant to embrace change found themselves returning for the bold flavors and the stories behind them for the first time in years. Unity Cafe felt like the place it had always dreamed it could be. A place where people came together, celebrated their differences, and created something greater than themselves. And at the heart of it all was Monica. Her strength and resilience a testament to the power of perseverance and the possibility of change. The cafe's usual hum of life, clinking dishes, the murmur of conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter was louder than ever. Unity Cafe, once a symbol of tension and division, now radiated warmth and inclusivity. The changes were palpable, but the journey had been far from easy. Will stood by the front counter, observing the scene with a sense of pride and relief. For the first time in years, he felt that Unity was living up to its name. Monica had become the heart of the cafe's transformation. Her bold new menu had not only revitalized the offerings but also drawn in a more diverse clientele. Families, couples, and groups of friends from all walks of life now filled the tables. Their curiosity for the unfamiliar dishes often turned into admiration. The cafe buzzed with a renewed energy, each bite of food telling a story. Yet it wasn't just the customers who had changed. The staff had grown too. Their initial skepticism toward Monica replaced by respect, and Maradi, the once fractured team, was now unified, their shared purpose evident in the seamless way they worked together one evening as the cafe prepared for its busiest dinner rush of the week. Monica stood at the center of the kitchen, orchestrating the flow of activity with the precision of a conductor. Her voice was calm yet commanding, her instructions clear and confident. "Table 4 needs 2, Roy, and a platter of fritters," she called out, her eyes scanning the line. "Let's make sure that plan is tight. This is their first time trying it." "Yes, chef," came the chorus of replies. The team moving as one, even Brandon, who had been one of Monica's harshest critics, now worked beside her without hesitation. His initial resistance had softened over weeks of watching her in action, her leadership proving time and again why she belonged. "Chef, do you want the garnish on the fritters to be cilantro or parsley?" Brandon asked, holding up the two options. "Cilantro," Monica replied without missing a beat. "It adds more brightness to the dish." He nodded and went back to work, a small smile playing on his lips. It was a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had come, not just as co-workers, but as a team. Meanwhile, in the dining area, Jacob and Ethan sat at a table near the window, their plates empty but their faces glowing with pride. They had become regular visitors to the cafe, their initial distrust of O slowly giving way to cautious respect. Watching their mother thrive in an environment that had once been hostile was a source of immense pride for the boys. "This place feels different now," Jacob remarked, his voice thoughtful as he looked around. "Like people actually care." Ethan nodded, his eyes following Monica as she emerged from the kitchen to check on a table. "Yeah, Mom's happy here." You can see it at that moment. He approached their table, a warm smile on his face. "How are you two doing?" he asked, his tone genuinely friendly. Jacob looked at him for a moment before responding. "We're good. The food was great. I'm glad to hear that," Will said. He hesitated briefly before adding, "You know, your mom is one of the best chefs I've ever worked with. You should be really proud of her." "We are," Jacob replied, his tone serious after a pause. He added, "And I guess we were wrong about you," a little O chuckled, ruffling Jacob's hair gently. "I'll take that." The boys shared a quiet laugh, their guarded demeanor softening. It was a small but significant step toward rebuilding trust, not just with U, but with the cafe as a whole. As the evening wore on, the cafe grew busier, the line for tables stretching out the door. The buzz of excitement was contagious, and even the staff seemed energized by the vibrant atmosphere. Monica moved between the kitchen and the dining area with ease, her presence commanding yet approachable. Customers often stopped her to compliment the food or ask about the stories behind the dishes, and she answered each question with genuine enthusiasm toward the end of the night, as the last tables were being cleared. Monica found herself alone in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, her arms crossed, a rare moment of quiet settling over her. She glanced around the space that had once been a source of so much pain, and found herself smiling. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers again, a place where she could finally feel at home, lost in thought. A voice interrupted. She turned to see UL standing in the doorway, a coffee cup in hand. His expression was warm, his posture relaxed. "Just taking it all in," she admitted. "It's been a journey." "It has," he agreed, stepping into the kitchen. "But you've done something incredible here, Monica. You brought this place back to life." She raised an eyebrow, her smile tinged with amusement. "It wasn't just me, you had a hand in it too." "Maybe," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "But you reminded me of what this place was supposed to be about. I lost sight of that for a long time." Monica's expression softened. "We all lose our way sometimes. What matters is finding it again." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the hum of the dishwasher the only sound in the room. Finally, Will spoke. "I know I can't undo what happened before," he said, his voice quiet. "But I want you to know how much I appreciate what you've done here. Not just for the cafe, but for me. You've made me a better leader and a better person." Monica met his gaze, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. "Thank you," she said simply. It was all that needed to be said. Over the next few months, Unity Cafe continued to thrive. The new menu became a staple of the community. Its bold flavors and heartfelt stories drew in customers from all walks of life. The staff, once divided, now worked together seamlessly. Their shared respect for Monica and each other was evident in everything they did. Jacob and Ethan became unofficial ambassadors of the cafe, often helping out after school and sharing their mother's journey with anyone who would listen. Their pride in her was matched only by her pride in them. The transformation of Unity Cafe was more than a professional achievement. It was a deeply personal one. He had set out to create a place of community and connection, and while the path had been fraught with mistakes and missteps, he had finally found his way back to that vision one evening as the cafe closed for the night. Will gathered the step together. They stood in a circle, their faces tired, but content after another busy day. "I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This cafe has always been about more than just food. It's about people, about coming together, supporting each other, and creating something bigger than ourselves. And that's exactly what we've done here." He turned to Monica, his gaze steady. "And I want to thank you, especially you. You've shown all of us what it means to lead with courage and grace." The room erupted into applause, the sound filling the cafe with warmth. Monica smiled, her heart full as she looked around at the team that had become her family as the applause died down. Will raised his coffee cup in a toast to ununity. He said to unity. The staff echoed their voices, strong and united, and in that moment, the cafe truly lived up to its name, a place of connection, resilience, and hope, where every voice was heard and every story mattered. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family and explore our channel for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one.